Hello, my name is Polina Surikova, and I will be doing my clinical methods teaching project overview on comprehension pronunciation of Russian verbs. So why did I decide to teach Russian verb comprehension pronunciation? It's a pretty large number of Russian speakers in the United States, and my client, who is also a future clinician, might be faced with a Russian speaker in their career. My client is also a bilingual individual who has an interest in learning new languages, so I just felt like, this activity will be engaging and entertaining for my client. So the vision was to give the client the knowledge of how to recognize and pronounce a few basic commonly used Russian action verbs. And with this knowledge, the client will be able to recognize those verbs in conversation or state a need or an interest when faced with a Russian speaker in real life. Focusing on common verbs related to everyday activities would ensure that my client can immediately apply their knowledge in practical situations, and also making the learning process more relevant and engaging for them. For the overview, first I gathered the materials, and the materials for me included 5 visual representations of 5 printed pictures that represent 5 different verbs. And then I had 4 flashcards with verbs just written on them. So there are 4 verbs, 5 visual representations, which means that one of the visual representations did not have a match. That's just to make sure that my client doesn't use process of elimination to make their decision. And then I created the baseline, and the baseline allowed me to set up expectations and to create procedures that will ultimately lead my client to achieve their goals. And then for teach session number 1, it allowed me to assess and enhance my partner's understanding of selected Russian verbs and ensure accurate pronunciation. And for teach session number 2, I had the same objectives in mind, just building upon my client's knowledge of selected Russian verbs and further refining pronunciation skills with a specific focus on achieving precise articulation on the first syllable. So I counted correct pronunciations based off of that articulation of the first syllable, which my client was not aware of. So how did I test my client's knowledge? So these are the materials that I was talking about earlier. We have 5 action verbs, and 4 of them are written here on the side. So 4 of these match up to the visual representation, and one of the visual representations is just, it doesn't have a match. And then I had my client pronounce the 4 verbs that are listed on the bottom here. So the baseline goals for the first part, I told my client, I will give you 4 flashcards with present tense verbs on them, and I need you to point to the flashcard and then point to one of the 5 pictures that I provided that you think best represents the action on the flashcard. And for the second part, I told my client, I will need you to pronounce the words written on the flashcards. And my expectation with that was that the client will be able to we'll get below a 50% on part 1, which was comprehension or picture matching, and then below a 25% or 0% on the second part, which is the pronunciation. And the baseline results were that, given the visual aids and flashcards only, without any prompting or cueing, the client was unable to get any of the pronunciations correctly since they were not modeled for her, and the client matched only one of the words to a correct picture. So for teach session number 1, my goal was to assess and enhance the client's understanding of selected Russian verbs and ensure the accurate pronunciation of the first syllable. So my expectation was that the client, or the short-term goal, was that the client will go from 25% on comprehension and 0 on pronunciation, which is what she got on the baseline, up to 75% for both comprehension and pronunciation. So the procedure included a warm-up, which is engaging in a short dialogue or activity involving familiar Russian terms, and introduce phonetic elements that mirror the target verbs. Followed by the review session, which was 10 minutes long, and we started by revisiting the verbs and flashcards from the previous session, the baseline session, discussing the common mistakes made in previous session, and clarifying any doubts. Followed by the comprehension assessment, which is where I display the 5 flashcards individually and request the partner to pair them with one of the 4 verbs, and then justifying their selection, and then I record their responses. Pronunciation assessment, which is where I instruct my client to pronounce the 4 verbs and concentrate on the initial syllable pronunciation, and then I document the pronunciation accuracy and give them a score. And then the feedback phase, where I talk to the client and I just give them some feedback on the things that they did well and on the things that may require a little bit more work, followed by comprehension practice, which will help my client long term, moving into teach session number 2, which is where I reshuffle the flashcards and I prompt the client to match again, and I offer real-time corrections. And then pronunciation practice, which is where I encourage my client to pronounce the initial syllable repeatedly, and I offer immediate tips and corrections. So the scaffolds for teach session number 1 were direct modeling, which involves her correct pronunciation was modeled for the client in the feedback phase. By hearing the correct way to pronounce the syllable, the client had a clear model to imitate. And then repetition and practice. So by repeating the verbs and focusing on areas of difficulty, my client had the chance to strengthen their newly acquired skills. Following immediate feedback, which means that after the assessment, I give them immediate feedback, and I help them understand and correct their previous mistakes. And also visual aids, which is flashcards were used as visual aids to support comprehension, and the client could form visual associations by pairing verbs with flashcards, aiding in memory and understanding. So the results of teach session number 1 were as follows. The pronunciation was a challenging aspect for my client, as they secured only 50% accuracy with a score of 2 out of 4 on pronunciation. And then the client demonstrated a commendable ability in comprehension matching, achieving a score of 3 out of 4 or 75%. So for the reflection, so more real-time corrections and modeling of correct pronunciations might be beneficial is what I came to. And then the repeated and immediate feedback could also allow for quicker adjustment and better long-term retention. And despite the challenges in pronunciation, the client maintained a positive attitude throughout the session. So for teach session number 2, my goal was for the client to achieve the long-term goal of getting at least 75% on both pronunciation and comprehension. And then to build upon my client's knowledge of selected Russian verbs and further refine pronunciation skills, and utilize pre- and post-session assessment to track the client's ability to correctly identify and understand the meaning of target verbs, and of course record and analyze the pronunciation during the interactive exercises, providing specific feedback. So for teach session number 2, the procedure was pretty much identical to the procedure I used for teach session number 1, except there was no comprehension practice and no pronunciation practice in this procedure, since I used it for the first one in order to improve the results of teach session number 2. So the results were that the client would demonstrate remarkable progress in pronunciation, achieved a 75% accuracy on the first syllable sound, so 75% or 3 out of 4 on pronunciation, and was able to achieve a score of 4 out of 4 or 100% on the comprehension aspect. Real-time corrections and modeling of correct pronunciations continue to contribute positively, fostering quick adjustment and enhancing my client's long-term retention. Further reflection, although the pronunciation continued to pose some challenges for my client, given that some of the vowels that were used in those first syllable sounds are not native to English, and shared reflections on the challenges faced in pronunciation during the previous sessions, emphasizing a commitment to improvement, focused pronunciation drills, reinforce positive engagement, and homework assignment are some of the things that I decided to use post teach session 1. So devoting additional time in the next session, if it was to exist, for target pronunciation drills to make sure that we get that pronunciation to a 4 out of 4, incorporating visual aids such as a whiteboard to illustrate correct pronunciation, continuing to reinforce the client's enthusiasm, introducing varied and engaging activities, assigned personalized practice materials. So homework is something that I would do if there were more teaching sessions involved, so including additional pronunciation exercises, interactive online resources, etc. So for the overall results, you can see here on the bottom on the x-axis we have the baseline, teach session number 1 and teach 2. So on the baseline, my client only got 0 out of 4 on pronunciation, 1 out of 4 in comprehension, and then we see that increase linearly with 2 out of 4 on pronunciation, and then 3 out of 4 for teach 1 and teach 2, and then 3 out of 4 on comprehension in teach session number 1, and a 4 out of 4 on comprehension in teach session number 2. Overall, the client was able to achieve the long-term goals I set out for them and really enjoyed the experience. So yeah. So overall, I believe that the teach session was a success. Thank you.